When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Greasecom Judo channel. Today's video, we are going to be continuing on with our Game of Thrones reread, and today's video will be Ned Stark's last POV of the entire series, because he's not going to make it much further in this story. But I wanted to, at this point, it's a sad thought, right? It's a sad thought, given I've been doing this series for quite a while now, upwards of like a year and a half, and, you know, this character is very important to that. He is 15 chapters in, and we're only into what, episode 60, 61 at this point, so he's basically has a chapter every 4. It's weird, right? Given that we're so close to this character, he's such a big part of the first book, for this to be his last POV just feels weird. I feel like I'm losing a bit of my soul. And yeah, so we're getting into Ned 15. For a refresher, for any of you guys that don't know where we left off with Ned and or Sansa, Ned has been imprisoned. He's in the black cells. Sansa has begged for his life, and somewhat of a deal has been crafted where if Ned was to plead his guilt and say that what he said was a lie and all these things, he could be given mercy. And that's where we've left off. So again, at this point in the beginning of the chapter, it's going to be about Ned, kind of what he's been going through during this time period of being imprisoned, leading up to the current time, and Varys coming to interlude into Ned's story. So that gets into page 628. We open to a horrifying scene as Ned notes his cell has no bed, no window, no light, or no poop bucket. It stank of urine. He remembers briefly the thick door as he was shoved in, but nothing else. He feels blind. You really get the thought that this cell, very similar to the sky cells in the Vale that we saw with Tyrion, these cells are supposed to break your mind. Right? There's no pleasantry here. There's no sound. There's no light. You're basically in a dark room with nothing to entertain yourself. It is a good way to make yourself go insane. And that's something Ned is battling in these cells, is to not lose his mind. But not only is Ned having to deal with that, but you also have to think about Ned was being heavily medicated because of his leg, and now he doesn't have that anymore. So you have the idea that he has probably a broken leg that's really hurting him and in pain, mixed with the fact that he's been betrayed and his whole world has come crashing down, mixed with the fact that these are horrible conditions. Ned is at his lowest point that he's probably ever been at this point, and that's made very apparent. This is a very dark chapter. I didn't remember this chapter being as horrifying as it was for Ned. It's maybe not like a top 5 like most dark chapters. I mean, I guess if you're going to go with the actual physical word of dark, it is quite dark because you can't see anything. But in terms of like it being some stuff happening that's really awful, chapters that come to mind, the Forsaken chapter, the Red Wedding, things like that, it's not like that level, but it's definitely a depressing read, to say the least. Or instead of feeling blind, he thinks he is dead with his king. He remembers them back in the crypts, going back to Ned and Robert's first meeting when they are going to see Lyanna, and how the king eats and the hand takes the shit. But it had been wrong. The king dies and the hand is buried. Again, Ned is just realizing, what was the one thing I talked about through all of Ned's POVs? Ned's power was tied to Robert. If Robert went down, so did Ned, because Ned did not have friends in King's Landing. He didn't have the morality to play the Game of Thrones in the way that others would. And so that is exactly what leads to his death, is Robert's death. And that's why I talk about a lot of Ned's actions are quite understandable and reasonable. It's just as soon as that switch happens, as soon as Robert dies, that's where Ned should have done some completely different actions and should have been trying to get out of King's Landing. He notes the dungeons and can't even think how deep down he is, as the dungeons and castle were built by masons from Maegor, but he killed them afterwards to hide their secrets. Something I found very interesting about Maegor. If you want to go back to Maegor and building the Red Keep and the dungeons and all these things, and he ends up killing the masons afterwards, like Ned sees here. And I have a question that I want to pose to you guys. Do you think that was the right decision? Because if you are building all these secret passageways and stuff to get out of the castle and things like that, you don't want that to ever get out. And so how is that going to be the case if there was a bunch of people that built it still alive? So I do find it fascinating, because if you want to build a castle like that, you almost feel like you have to do what Maegor did. Now, we know it doesn't entirely work because there are still people that figure out these passages, right? Notably, we're going to see in House of the Dragon, so I won't spoil it, but, you know, there is someone that figures out those. Varys in the normal story. You would have to assume Bloodraven was someone that knew of a lot of the passages. So there are people that end up finding out about a lot of these passages, but it's still kept very secret. And so I think it's an interesting thing to debate on whether Maegor should have done what he did in terms of what he wanted to accomplish. Again, killing a bunch of people, always a bad thing, but in terms of what he was trying to accomplish, it's interesting if he needed to do that or not. But Ned thinks that he damns them all: Varys, Littlefinger, the Lannisters, Renly, but more importantly, he damned himself as being a fool. And this is one of the reasons we love Ned as a character. Ned is someone that takes accountability for his actions. And so here he realizes that, yes, all these people didn't help him, right? Varys didn't help him, Littlefinger didn't help him, you know, everybody that was against him, the wrongs that they've committed. But at the same time, Ned, at the end of it anyway, did not play the Game of Thrones the way he should have, and he's realizing that right now. But that gets us into page 629. Cersei's face seemed to be a ghost to him as he remembers their encounter and how he had lost, and all his men had paid the price. Again, he's thinking about that, what the intro to this channel is. When you play the Game of Thrones, you either win or you die. There is no middle ground. That's what Ned is thinking about in this period. And he's again thinking about not only just himself, but he's thinking about the people that died because of his playing the Game of Thrones and losing. He thinks that he will weep at the thought of his daughters, but the tears do not come. Again, Ned is a Stark, right? He's been forced to hide his emotion. In this world, you're supposed to be a manly man. You can't cry. And so Ned is just used to it, right? He's been through so many tragedies in his life. He's used to holding it in. And you even think about everything else that's gone on here with Ned also losing Robert, someone that was a brother to him. It's a really difficult time at this time. He then notes the state of his leg, as it did not hurt so much when he did not move. So he stayed in a constant state of sleeping and waking. He could not tell the days as there was no sun or moon or even a light to mark the walls. Again, it really gives you the idea that the Black Cells is a place where you cannot tell the days. You don't know what is going on. You have that also with that Ned can't move, right? Ned can't at least pace. He can't stay active at all. He is forced to just lay there. It's a really horrifying thought about how someone could be living, you know, days and or maybe even a week or more. But that gets us into his dreams. What did he even think about? And in his dreams, he thinks of blood and broken promises. Again, interesting, given a lot of things that would be circulating in Ned's mind, right? He thinks a lot about Lyanna and Jon in this chapter. But also, I think that's the one we think about is obvious. Lyanna's death and the promises that he made her. But you also think about things about with Robert, right? Ned is going to think about Robert and how he lied to him on his deathbed. Interesting, because you're thinking about really two deathbed situations, but in Ned's case, he did something that was the opposite of Lyanna, where we know that Ned kept some sort of promise to Lyanna, but now he feels though he's failed that promise. Ned has kind of failed another promise to protect his children and things like that. Well, if Ned is, you know, dead or in jail, he can't protect, you know, his actual children. And also, he didn't tell Robert that his children that he believed were his children were actually not his. So there's a lot of things that are overcoming Ned right now, and realizing that death could be, you know, coming up very soon. He has a lot of regret, and I think that's just normal. But Ned thinks when he is not dreaming it is worse. He thinks about Catelyn and what she is doing, and if he shall ever see her again. Again, just Ned is not only in his dreams being haunted by the past, he's now being haunted by things that he has to worry about, his family and things like that. But the hours turned to days, but he tried to keep himself sane, thinking of what was happening in the outside world and trying to keep hope. As Stannis and Renly would be gathering host, and Catelyn would rally the North and the Vale. It's rational thinking. That's what you would be thinking, that regardless, Stannis and Renly will be marching on King's Landing to take it back. Hopefully, again, in his mind, he believes that under Stannis's banner. But at the same time, you also have to think about, well, Catelyn was in the Vale. She also has a good line to the north. She's going to be uniting everyone against the Lannisters. That's just not the case at this point. And that's unfortunate for Ned, because in a lot of ways, if that was the truth, Ned would be in a solid position here. but he also notes his worsening condition as his leg is hot to the touch. He probably, again, has a fever. He's not been on any pain medication. He's not getting proper treatment for it. In a lot of ways, he could easily just die of an infection to his leg, even if it wasn't Joffrey that was killing him. Like, if he had been sent back north, there's still a good chance he actually would have died to his injury. But you also conflict the part of that part of it, but also dying of probably dehydration and or starvation. When you are in an injury or hurt, you need a lot of those things to help nourish your body to fight that. And he's not getting that. So there's a lot of things just going wrong for Ned in this moment. But Ned at this point finds himself thinking more about Robert in his youth. Again, let's not forget, Robert was a brother to Ned, right? And I think Robert was more of a brother to Ned than even someone like Benjen. I won't go as far as saying Brandon, because I think Brandon and Ned, were like a brotherly relationship. But again, Ned had more time to be around Robert. So I would assume Robert would be one of the closest people to Ned at this point of his life, even with some of the issues the two faced. Think about what Ned was willing to give up just to try and help Robert, right? All the things that he put into danger and things like that because of his love and respect for Robert. So that, again, is something else that's going to be really weighing on Ned as well. He remembers Robert with his great war hammer and his antlered helm on a war horse. Again, a really awesome picture to think about, and something we hopefully will get to see at some point is Robert Baratheon in his youth in a Robert Rebellion show. That would be extremely cool. But he hears Robert's laugh and remembers his eyes and thinks about how Robert was killed by a pig and himself captured in a dungeon. Again, not a great way to go out for two war heroes taking down the Targaryen dynasty. One killed by a pig, and sooner rather than later, Ned will be killed by a boy king who gets him killed. And Ned also is going to lose all of his kind of respect and honor because he says that he was trying to do a coup to the people of King's Landing. So they both go out kind of in a whimper. Ned begins to have illusions, seeing Robert and or hearing him. Ned thinks that he failed him and lied to him, but the Robert illusion tells him, what has it cost him? Will his honor protect his children? Can he swallow his pride? Again, the main thing that's going to be on the table here is, can Ned swallow that pride and honor like he did for Lyanna, right? In a lot of ways, this is a repeat of history. The same thing that happens with Lyanna, where Ned had to say that, oh, Jon was his bastard, and all these things, if you believe R plus L. So again, this is going to be different if you believe N plus A, be a different interpretation, but still kind of similar, right? I think it still applies. But you have to be this idea that Ned basically had to get rid of his honor, get rid of his pride, and protect this child. And that's similar here, right? Ned is going to have to do all these things, say that he was trying to take the throne from Joffrey, that he was lying the whole time to protect his daughter Sansa. So again, it's the same idea, just done a second time, and that's already in the back of Ned's mind. It's only going to be awakened when Varys comes. But the illusion then turns to Littlefinger, mocking him, but disappears when Ned tries to speak. Time passes, and he is, again, half asleep when he hears the footsteps come down the hall. Ned, again, is in this state where he doesn't know what's real anymore. He's seeing things. He doesn't know when he's dreaming and when he's awake. You can't see anything. There's no way really to tell outside of maybe like pinching yourself or something. But at this time, Ned believes this might have been an illusion. But eventually the door opens. And this is going to be a really weird moment because Ned is finally seeing some bit of light come through the door, but also he is given a jug. And Ned drinks until he thinks he will be sick. Again, this is probably the only sustenance that he's had in probably a number of days. You can only imagine. But he asks what day it is and about his daughters, but the man says no talking, taking the jug. The door crashes shut and leaves Ned to his own again. But he notices the room does not smell of urine anymore. It smells of nothing. Again, he's become very used to his living situation. Things that were really bad have now become a little bit more immune to them. But after this, he was no longer able to tell when he was dreaming or awake. But he dreams of the year, the false spring of his youth, and of Harrenhal, and Robert, and the sweet wines. And that'll get us into page 631, and this is kind of a really important part of this chapter. Again, I use this quite a lot in my Robert Rebellion series, so check that out if you have not. But a lot of what we kind of talk about, especially in one of the episodes, comes from this portion right here. But let's get into it. He remembers Brandon's laughter, Robert's ferocity, unhorsing many, Jaime Lannister in his youth with his new armor kneeling in front of Aerys, swearing to protect him. Ned notes how all of the Kingsguard had been there to witness it, and how Gerald Hightower had put the white cloak on his shoulders. Again, a very important day. Think about everything going on, right? You're going to have Rhaegar crowning Lyanna. You're going to have Jaime becoming part of the Kingsguard. You're going to have all these relationships forming at this tourney and the sides starting. This is a very important event. It's probably one of the most important events in all of history. But the day had belonged to Rhaegar, as he had unseated even Brandon. Interesting, given what is to happen. And this is something I find very interesting. Was there already some bitterness between Brandon and Rhaegar? That Brandon just didn't like Rhaegar? Men tend to really be jealous of another person when they are better at them at something. It's just something that men, unfortunately, have a lot of pride towards. And this could be something Brandon could be feeling, that he already didn't like Rhaegar. So when Rhaegar crowns Lyanna, when she's already betrothed to Robert, or when, again, Rhaegar has his own wife, it's just kind of confirming things that Brandon already thought about Rhaegar. And so that's why he can get so much angrier and all those things. And why when this rumor comes out that Rhaegar steals Lyanna, that's why he's so angry, because he already has these things built up in his mind that, yeah, he believes that could happen, right? That's not something unheard of. He would never think that his sister would go with this guy willingly. This is a moment that I think is very underrated and something that's not really talked about a lot, but I found that interesting and I wanted to point that out. Rhaegar also unseated Bronze Jan Royce and the famed Sword of the Morning, Arthur Dayne. Ned also notes that Rhaegar wore the armor he would die in, the black plate armor with the red ruby 3 heads of the dragon. And I want to point out here, the Targaryens have like the coolest armor. The Targaryens and the Baratheons, I mean, their armor is just sick. But let's continue. All had been going well. Robert had been jesting with Lord Hunter and Jon Arryn when Rhaegar rode past Elia, his wife, and placed the crown in Lyanna's lap, making the tourney go silent. Ned could still remember the crown of winter roses, blue and white. Again, very important to understand why these flowers are significant, to understand Rhaegar and Lyanna theory. It's very important. They're Lyanna's favorite flowers. They're always associated with her. And so when we get to a Clash of Kings and a certain point, especially with Dany in the House of the Undying, important to remember this. But something else I want to point out here. It really paints this picture that a lot of these people were here for a good time, and this gets interrupted. But something else I find interesting. If we want to go even further onto why Brandon could not like Rhaegar, if this tournament had been staged, right? Like if that had been a thing where, oh yeah, we want Rhaegar to win because in all regards, this was the event that was meant to kind of crown Rhaegar against Aerys, very similar to the Dunk and Egg, the third novella. Could this have been a situation in which Rhaegar was trying to fix this tourney? If Brandon was approached to throw it, that could be another thing. Now, I don't think Rhaegar would be stupid enough to assume a Stark would do that, but who knows if people around him, if mumblings couldn't have already been going around the tournament that this was a fixed event, that Rhaegar was meant to win, and that becomes even more obvious and apparent when he wins. Could that have been what people were talking about? Could Brandon have gotten wind of that? And that could have been another thing building onto why Brandon didn't like Rhaegar, to then believe things that would come later. I don't know. I think that one doesn't have a lot of backing behind it, given all the accounts of Harrenhal. We don't really hear much about that idea, but that could be something interesting just to kind of ponder and to think on. Ned reached out to touch them, but felt the thorns instead as the blood went down his hands. Again, just to paint the idea that on the outside of this, right, it was this nice crown, but what did it really mean? It meant the sparking of a war. This interaction is what, in a lot of ways, will kind of lead to some things that follow, right? People believing instantly on Rhaegar capturing Lyanna because of this interaction. It kind of felt like Rhaegar was lusting after Lyanna. It was really weird. That's kind of what this is to signify, but also to signify Lyanna's death, the blood that she will have during pregnancy, and what will come after that. I think that is all really interesting. This is some of my favorite writing from George in this first chapter. It's just kind of a lot of the different meanings a lot of these things can have here. But at this he woke trembling, remembering Lyanna say, "Promise me," from her bed of blood, and how she had always loved the scent of winter roses. Again, winter roses being used in Lyanna's death, something we've seen multiple times throughout this first book. Ned weeps and thinks he is going mad, but again he is brought water. And he noted that this must be each day. Again, he's just assuming that he gets at least some water each day. Interesting enough, he's still not being fed. So that is quite interesting. If you're trying to keep Ned alive, you're not feeding him, which is interesting. But, you know, it's interesting given that, like, even Tyrion, how much he was hated in the Vale, they at least had the idea of trying to feed him. Now, that didn't go as well. Mord did not exactly feed him. So, but he's not sure of this. He's not sure if this water means each day, but that's just his assumption. It's his best idea he has. But at first, he had asked for news of his daughters, but he was met with silence and kicks. So eventually, he just began to ask for food, right? If you're not going to get any of this information, might as well ask for things that are more likely to happen, like food. But when none came, Ned begins to think, do they mean to starve him? That cannot be the case. Why would that happen? Cersei would have just killed him in the throne room if she wanted him to die. So what is the purpose of this? And again, Ned is going to come to a pretty good conclusion. That's why I always say, when people say Ned is dumb, I just don't think they understand what that means. I don't think Ned is very dumb at all. I think Ned is not a politician. I think he is someone that understands logic pretty well. Like, he concludes right away. She wants him alive, weak, vulnerable. She wants him in a state in which Ned is going to be able to compromise his integrity more. If he's in a weakened state, he's really struggling, he's going to be willing to do things to get out of that situation more than likely. Now, that's not exactly Ned as a character, but that's the idea here. But Ned notices that Catelyn still has Tyrion. If Tyrion is still with Catelyn, okay, well, there can be some sort of trade here. That's what Ned is thinking. Now, Varys is going to point out there's a little bit of lapse of logic in there, but part of it is, again, Catelyn doesn't have Tyrion anymore. But Ned doesn't know that. Again, that's showing how much information Ned has kind of found out and how news travels. Again, the same thought Robb had, but we see how Catelyn fumbled the bag here. It was a massive loss to lose Tyrion, and she really misplayed that entire situation. But this is Ned's hope for now, the thing kind of keeping him going. But at this, the door opens and Ned heads towards the light and asks for food. But a familiar voice, dressed once again like a jailer, says wine for him. Again, no food is being given to Ned. I still find that very curious. But it takes a moment for Ned to place it, but he notes it is Varys. But it doesn't look like Varys. Touching him to make sure it is him. Again, we just talked about the illusions that Ned's been having. This makes a lot of sense because this is quite a weird interaction. But he notes he has transformed himself into a man with a beard. He asks what kind of magician he is, but Varys notes a thirsty one and prompts Ned to drink. So yeah, Varys just has a completely different appearance. He's playing a role, and this is something that's going to come up a lot in Storm of Swords, and especially in A Feast for Crows when they got to like figure out what all happened here. But Varys is in a really interesting position where he has control over the jail cells. That's a very important point, because if any time Varys saw that there was a reason to get someone out of prison, he could. And it's even really foreshadowed like directly in this chapter. Ned asks if it is the same poison they gave Robert, but Varys says no and drinks from it first to prove that it is not. And Ned has a little but almost wrenches it back up. Yeah, if you've ever drank any type of wine or alcohol on a empty stomach, it does not go well. So yeah, Ned is kind of struggling with that. But Varys tells him his hour has come, and Ned asks about his daughters, to which Varys tells him. I think it's interesting that Varys tells him a lot of truth in this, but we all know it's kind of for a certain reason. Arya has escaped to Meereen and has not been seen by Varys or the Lannisters, a kindness, as Joffrey does not like Arya, which is a great point. Like, if Arya was captured, there's a good chance that Joffrey would somehow have her killed, or at the very least, tortured. But Sansa is being held close and gave a compelling speech in Ned's defense a few days past. That really paints the picture of kind of how long Ned has been in captivity. It's been probably at the very least, a week, if not longer. Varys finishes noting that he must realize that he is a dead man. Again, I think Ned at this point kind of is leaning that way, but he just has some hopes that Varys is about to crush. Now, I will say, Ned is not a completely a dead man, right? He has the option of probably taking the black. There's a small chance in which Robb wins the war, or at least starts winning, and a trade happens there. So it's not completely hopeless for Ned, but Varys is right. Like, it's very low odds at this moment. Ned notes that she will not kill him as Catelyn has Tyrion, but Varys notes kind of the opposite. She has the wrong brother, and he is probably dead in the Vale at this point. Again, Catelyn doesn't have Tyrion, and also Cersei doesn't really give a shit about Tyrion. It's more about the implication of him being a Lannister, very similar to like Tywin, but even then, I don't think Cersei would trade Tyrion for Ned, whereas I feel like Tywin would consider it a lot more. Ned notes that if this is true, slit his throat and be done with it. Again, Ned at this point is kind of tired of it, right? If he really is lost at this point, why keep going, right? Just end his suffering. But Ned notes how dizzy he is, tired and heartsick. Again, remember, Ned is drinking alcohol with no food for probably at least a week at this point. It's not a good position that Ned is in. Varys notes that is the last thing that he would want, but Ned notes he did nothing as his men were slaughtered. Again, if you really care about me as a person, like in Ned's position, why did you do nothing for me when all of this was going down? Varys notes that he would again. He is only one man, the Spider. There were a ton of swords in the room, but he tells about his past. Again, just put it this way. Varys, yes, he may be powerful, but he cannot stop Ned from making actions to go with Littlefinger. At that point, Ned was already gone, right? There was nothing Varys could do, and that's what Varys is trying to say here. But again, we get a really interesting backstory about how he was a mummer and how he learned every person has their role to play, even at court. Very similar to the speech we get with Jon to Aemon about the role of Samwell at the Watch. So very interesting the way that that's kind of tied in here. But he notes the different small council members and how they must be, like how they must be able to get coin, or how they must be able to be sly or have spies. All of this is almost correct on. Like, not everybody is going to be good for a certain position. Like, Stannis would not be a good master of, like, spies, for instance. He is a good master of laws. Like, that'd be something he'd be good at. Or a master of ships. Those are things Stannis would excel in. But other things he would not be. Like, master of coin, Stannis wouldn't be good at that. So, again, I think Varys is kind of dead on there. But Ned studies Varys and his fake appearance and asks if he can free him from this place. Now, this is interesting because the response Varys gets is very telling, and it should be something that we should have, if you're reading this book for the first time, should be something you really should be thinking about. Why does George give us this answer? Varys says he could, but he won't. That's an interesting line. That gives us the idea that, yes, he could free Ned if he wanted to, but he's just not going to. Because again, too many questions would be asked. Everything would kind of lead back to Varys, and that's true. Think about what happens in A Feast for Crows, right? But this is direct foreshadowing into Tyrion's escape in Storm of Swords. Ned notes that he is blunt, but expected nothing less. And Varys notes that a spider has no honor or luxuries of a highborn, which is true, right? Like, Varys doesn't have the protection that Ned has, right? Even Ned has some protection right now. If Ned was just some common person or a lower lord or something like that, he would be dead already. Like, if Varys was in Ned's position, Varys would be dead, right? Varys does not have that value that someone like Ned has at this moment of keeping alive. Ned then asks if he will at least carry a message for him, and Varys says he will, but he will read it first and send it if it is for his benefit. And Ned asks, what does Varys want? Now, this is very interesting again. Varys is being straight up with Ned at this point, right? And there's no reason for Varys not to be. Ned is going to die, more than likely. And so Varys just basically says, yeah, if you give me a message that is going to help me, right? If it benefits me in some way, creating peace, whatnot, whatever, forestalling a war for when Dany comes over, I will do it. But that'll get us into page 634, and we get a very conflicting thing of what Varys wants. Varys says without hesitation, peace. Varys says he was the only one trying to keep Robert alive from his enemies for 15 years, but he could not protect him from his friends, and asks what possessed him to tell Cersei about her children. So let's dive into this really quick. Varys says that he wants peace. That's a lie. We know that's straight up a lie. He is trying to forestall it, so he is trying to create peace, but for later, he wants Dany and Drogo to come over to break that peace, slaughtering hundreds, thousands of innocents. That is not true, right? He's going to say later on that he's, you know, fighting for the realm or whatever. We also know that's not true. We also know that Varys gave Aerys information that Rhaegar was going to take over, or was trying to. That was not for peace, because if he would have allowed that, there actually would have been probably peace. So we know that this is a lie. And is it a lie that Varys is telling Ned to make him like look better, or is it because Varys does believe that's what he wants? But how do you achieve peace? Is that's the issue that maybe Varys is struggling with. But again, I want to point out here, because Varys asks, you know, what possessed him to tell Cersei about her children. That is a weird question, given I don't think that's where Ned went wrong. A lot of people point to that decision as being that's when Ned screwed up. That's not when Ned screwed up. Ned screwed up after Robert's death, because when Ned tells Cersei that, oh yeah, your children are not Robert's, you're screwed, you need to leave, Robert is still alive. And so Ned has all but won. There is nothing Cersei can do outside of, oh, Robert dies. That is the only way that Cersei wins. And even then, Cersei herself wasn't sure if Robert was going to die, right? So again, it's a tough situation. And I think Ned, for the most part, played it how his character would and didn't play it badly until after Robert died. But Ned responds mercy. Varys notes he forgets Ned's honor, as he has met so few of people who actually possess this. And seeing where it got Ned, he knows why. Again, having a lot of those qualities that Ned has doesn't get you very far in King's Landing and at court. But Ned asks if he questioned Lancel, and Varys says that Cersei had given him his favorite wine, but even if the boar had not killed him, it would have been a fall or stray arrow. His mercy killed the king. I, again, kind of disagree with this. I think it's a lot of Varys trying to paint the blame on Ned, because in a lot of ways, it's Robert who killed Robert. It wasn't Cersei. It wasn't Lancel. Yeah, they were helping it along, but it's Robert that killed Robert. Robert not having any restraint from drinking and all that. And I don't think that somebody would have actually shot Robert. There's not anything in there for them. There's no way they would have gotten away. Like, I don't think that would have happened. Maybe a fall, right? Maybe Robert gets so drunk he falls, but would that have killed Robert? Who knows? Again, I think that Cersei and the Lannisters got really lucky here. I don't think that Ned is the reason that Robert died. I think that's just kind of preposterous. Ned says the gods forgive me, and Varys says the gods will, but she would have killed him sooner rather than later anyhow, so she could deal with his brother. So again, Varys is pointing out the obvious here, that Cersei would have tried to kill him anyway. It just kind of sped it up. And so Ned really isn't that really to blame. It's more that he's saying that because of Ned's intervention, it caused her to kill him quicker. But at this point, we get to the crux of the issue, right? Why is Cersei keeping Ned alive? Why is Ned trying to be used here by Varys and also Cersei? Well, because Robert's brother posed a huge threat. Like Ned was trying to do, Cersei knows that Robert's brothers, Stannis and Renly, have better claims to the throne than Joffrey does. And so that's something that she's going to try to stamp out quickly. But how does she do that, right? There's a war happening in the Riverlands right now. Tywin and his forces with Jaime are all kind of in that area trying to fix the Riverland and Northern issue at this time. How does she deal with Stannis and Renly? But Varys notes he should have taken Littlefinger's offer and supported Joffrey, and Ned is shocked to know how he found out this. Again, just more indications that Varys is in the walls, or that Varys and Littlefinger maybe talked about this, that Varys just knows a lot of information. But again, I don't know. I want to make a video on this in the future, but do you guys think that Littlefinger actually would have gone along with Ned? Right? Like, I don't think that would have happened. Every decision that Littlefinger has made has seemed to be to the detriment of Ned and getting Ned out of the picture, because I think Littlefinger still sees a chance with Catelyn or whatnot. His whole plan kind of revolves around Ned dying. So keeping Ned, yes, maybe it would have gotten Littlefinger some sort of reward, but there's only so high that Littlefinger could have climbed with Ned that I think logically it just makes sense for Littlefinger to always support Cersei in this situation. But I'd love to know what your guys' opinions are on that. Varys says he knows all and not to worry, but he does know the queen will call upon him in the morrow. Ned asks why, and Varys says that she is frightened by you, as she has worse issues to deal with, like the fighting the Riverlands, the Dornish, the Baratheons, and Lysa, as there's no love between the two when Lysa was at court. Again, you look at all the situation, you look at the situation going on in Westeros, and why it's so fun to speculate about this time in Westeros. The Dornish hate the Lannisters. The Arryns hate the Lannisters. The Baratheons, both Stannis and Renly, don't like the Lannisters and are probably going to declare war on them. The Riverlands and the Lannisters are already at war, and the North has a host coming down south. Everyone seems to be against the Lannisters, and so you want to minimize as many conflicts or wrap them up as quickly as possible. Cersei is trying to do exactly the opposite of what Aerys did. Aerys was someone during the Robert's Rebellion era. He didn't deal with all these isolated pockets. He let them get together. Cersei's trying to kind of avoid that, and so that aspect of it, she's very smart. Varys then also tells of Robb coming south with an army, and Ned notes he is just a boy, but Varys notes he has an army, which is very worrisome. Cersei is also worried about Stannis, as while the Lannisters spend their forces in the Riverlands, Stannis will take the castle and lop off Cersei's head. Again, doesn't have the most amount of men at King's Landing. If Stannis was to come, like in the end of Clash of Kings, with the full might of the Stormlands, who knows what would happen there. It would seem very likely that Stannis would win. But Ned would love this, as Stannis is the rightful ruler. But Varys notes Ned would be dead, and Cersei will not want to hear that response, and it would be a shame for Sansa's hard work for nothing. Again, Ned would die in this situation, but I don't think Ned really cares in that point of view. As long as his children aren't hurt, if he dies, so be it. If that's what ends up happening because justice happens with Stannis taking over, well, so be it. But Varys notes that even Cersei knows a tame wolf is more valuable than a dead one, which is she is 100% correct. Ned is shocked by this. Ned is shocked by this, as Varys wants him to serve a woman who killed his king, his men, and crippled his son. But Varys says he wants him to serve the realm. Put away his claim about Joffrey, bend the knee, and make Robb do that as well. Make peace so Cersei can deal with Stannis. Cersei will believe him because he is honorable. All the while, he will be allowed to live at the Watch with Benjen and Jon. And again, this is a very interesting, because Cersei puts a lot of trust in Ned. And why is that? Because she knows Ned is very honorable, right? He will keep a secret if that is what he agrees to do. And so that's a really interesting point. Again, we're putting that idea that how much does Ned value his life, his pride, his honor, and how does he deal with his children, his family? How does that come into direct correlation? It's once again, the heart at conflict is really what Ned is going to be struggling with in this chapter. But Cersei's plan here makes a lot of sense. If you can get the North out of this war, if you can get the Riverlands out of this war, if you can have the Vale out of this war, if you can take that coalition out of the war and allow the Lannisters to focus on Stannis and Renly, this is a much better situation, and it gives the Lannisters a way better chance of actually holding the throne. So this is a very good plan, I think, by Cersei. And so we'll see how kind of that goes. It's not going to go well. It's going to become very stupid the way it's executed, but yeah. But also the next few lines are very telling, because Varys brings up Jon and Benjen, two characters that were related very heavily to, it would seem, Robert's Rebellion. And Ned thinks about Jon and is filled with shame and thinks if he could only talk with him one more time. What is this talk about? Why does he feel shame? Is it because Jon went to the wall without Ned ever telling him of his actual parentage? Because of whether that being Ned and Ashara, R+L, or whatever, Jon doesn't know who he is as a person. He doesn't know what he could be, right? Could he be the legitimate heir to the Starks or to the Danes, right, of Starfall? Could he be the heir to the throne? There's a lot of things that Ned could be feeling shame about. And having one more last conversation, something that we see that the show adapted and put at a different part. It's actually in Ned and Jon's last scene. They put this part of it and put that in there. It's very interesting that this comes here when it talks about Ned being able to keep a secret. Very interesting line, given what I think a lot of people believe about Jon's parentage. But that'll get us into 636. Ned thinks about this in pain and asks if he is in league with Littlefinger, but Varys denies this, saying he feeds just enough info to make Cersei and Littlefinger believe so. And Ned cuts in, just like you did with me. and asks Varys who he truly serves. And I want to quote the book here because I think this is a very important part for Varys of understanding the character, but also to kind of look at some of the logical inconsistencies with the character of Varys in terms of what we know he's planning and what he will do in the future. Varys smiled thinly. Why the realm, my good lord? However could you doubt that? I swear it by my lost manhood. I swear the realm, and the realm needs peace. He finished the last swallow of wine and tossed the empty skin aside. So what is your answer, Lord Eddard? Give me your word that you'll tell the queen what she wants to hear when she comes calling. Again, we know this is to be very interesting because what does Varys deem is the good of the realm? Right? What does he deem that to mean? Does he mean, oh, it needs to have a certain ruler that's been educated and all of that to rule? Cough young Griff. Does he mean Dany, someone that would be better for the throne? What does Varys mean by the good of the realm and for the people of the realm when he causes so much conflict and war at the same time? It's that old classic argument of the ends justify the means. But Ned at this notes, if he did this, his word would mean nothing, and says his life is not as precious to him as that. Again, Ned is not willing to lie. Ned is not willing to throw aside his honor and those things. But then Varys does a nice little subtle blackmail. Varys notes it is a pity and questions what about his daughters, and Ned grows chilly and shock and pleads to not involve her in any of his schemes. She is just a child. It comes all the way back to the children. It comes to Ned's tie with children, how he believes their innocence, and they are innocent, by the way, and how they should not be used in these things. It goes back to the conflict with Robert that Ned had about killing Dany, her child. It goes back to the deaths of Rhaenys and Aegon. Rhaegar's children specifically. There's a lot of Rhaenys and Aegons in the story, so I better clarify that. It's the one thing that has always driven Ned's actions, protecting his family and children, and the things that he believes are honorable and justified. But here, blackmailing Sansa is something that's a step so far that Ned thinks about this, and Ned must contemplate what he will do. But Varys even notes that. It goes back to the children. Rhaenys and Aegon were even younger than Sansa, but yet that did not spare them. And that gets us into page 637, ending out the chapter with another quote. Rhaenys was a child too, Prince Rhaegar's daughter, a precious little thing, younger than your girls. She had a small black kitten she called Balerion, did you know? I always wondered what happened to him. Rhaenys liked to pretend he was a true Balerion, the black dread of old, but I imagine the Lannisters taught her the difference between a kitten and a dragon quick enough, the day they broke down her door. Varys gave a long, weary sigh, the sigh of a man who carried all the sadness of the world in a sack upon his shoulders. The High Septon once told me that as we sin, so do we suffer. If that's true, Lord Eddard, tell me, why is it always the innocents who suffer most when you High Lords play your Game of Thrones? Ponder it, if you would, while you wait upon the Queen, and spare a thought for this as well. The next visitor who calls on you could bring you bread and cheese and the milk of the poppy for your pain, or he could bring you Sansa's head. The choice, my dear Lord Hand, is entirely yours. And now you see why they have starved him, why they've dehydrated him, because they want him vulnerable. They want to paint a situation in which it'd be better for him if he agreed to their terms. We see the blackmailing here of Sansa's death, which they wouldn't kill Sansa. I don't think at this point it doesn't really make sense to do, but Ned doesn't know that. Ned knows the Lannisters as being cruel, immoral. What if that was to happen? But Varys also uses the guilt card, the innocence card, that all the innocent people are dying because of Ned, things that Ned is already feeling guilty for and his people and how he's led them to death. But in reality, Varys is a character that causes a lot of the innocents to die. And so Ned is left with what will he do? Now we know what he'll do. He will agree to these terms to protect Sansa, but it won't go the way we hope. And that is the last Ned POV chapter of the entire story. It's really sad given, how much I've covered this character over the last year and a half, really dove into his psychology. And yeah, it's going to be even worse when we get to Catelyn and the Red Wedding. But yeah, thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys all enjoyed this video. Can I get an RIP in the chat for Ned and his POV line? I will be doing a funny little thing for Arya's chapter for his death. But yeah, I hope you guys all enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.